Chapter 11: Why we prefer a wrong map. Do not map at all. Availability bias. Smoking cannot be that bad for you. My grandfather smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day and lived to be more than 100. Our Manhattan is really safe. I know someone who lives in the middle of the village and he never locks his door. Not even when he goes on vacation, and his apartment has never been broken into. We use statements like this to try to prove something, but they actually prove nothing at all. When we speak like this, we succumb to the availability bias. Are there more English words that start with a key or more words with a K as their third letter? Answer: more than twice as many English words have K in third position than start with a K. Why do most people believe the opposite is true? Because we can think of words beginning with a K more quickly and they are more available to our memory. The availability bias says this: we create a picture of the world using the examples that most easily come to mind. This is absurd, of course, because it's reality. Things don't happen more frequently just because we cannot conceive of them more easily. Thanks to the availability bias, we travel through life with an incorrect risk map in our heads, and thus we systematically overestimate the risk of being the victim of a plane crash, a car accident, or a murder, and we underestimate the risk of dying from less spectacular means, such as diabetes or stomach cancer. The chance of bomb attack are much rarer than we think, and the chance of suffering depression are much higher. We attach too much likelihood to spectacular, flashy, or loud outcomes. Anything silent or invisible we downgrade in our minds. Our brains imagine show-stopping outcomes more readily than mundane ones, and we think dramatically, not quantitatively. Doctors often fall victim to the availability bias. They have their favorite treatments which they use for all possible cases, and more appropriate treatments may exist, but these are in the recesses of the doctors' minds. Consequently, they practice what they know, consultant or no better, and if they come across an entirely new case, they do not throw up their hands and cite, "I really don't know what to tell you." Instead, they turn to one of their more familiar methods, whether or not it is still. If something is repeated often enough, it gets stored at the forefront of our minds. It doesn't even have to be true. How often did the Nazi leaders have to repeat the term "the Jewish question" before the masses began to believe that it was a serious problem? You simply have to utter the words UFO, life energy, or karma enough times before people start to credit them. The availability bias has an established seat at the corporate board's table, too. Board members discuss what management has submitted, usually quarterly figures, instead of more important things such as a clever move by the competition, a slump in employee motivation, or an unexpected change in customer behavior. They tend not to discuss what's not on the agenda. In addition, people prefer information that is easy to obtain, be it economic data or recipe. They make decisions based on this information rather than on more relevant but harder to obtain information. Even with disastrous results, for example, we have known for 10 years that this so-called black school's formula for the pricing of derivative financial product does not work. But we don't have another solution, so we carry on with an incorrect tool. It is as if you were in a foreign city without a map and then pulled out one or for your hometown and simply used that. We prefer wrong information to no information, and thus the availability bias has presented the banks with the billions in losses. What was it that Frank Sinatra sang? "Oh, my heart is beating wildly, and it's all because you are here, or when I'm not near the girl I love the girl I'm near." A perfect example of the availability bias. Fend it off by spending time with the people who think differently than you think, and people whose experiences and expertise are different than yours. We require others' input to overcome the availability bias. Chapter 12: Why no pain no gain should set alarm bells ringing. Then it will get worse before it gets better fallacy. A few years ago, I was on a vacation in Corsica and fell sick. The symptoms were new to me and the pain was growing by the day. Eventually, I decided to seek help at a local clinic. A young doctor began to inspect me, prodding my stomach, gripping my shoulder and knee, and then poking each vertebra. I began to suspect that he had no idea what my problem was, but I was not really sure. So I simply endured the strange examination. To signal its end, he pulled out his notebook and said, "Antibiotic. Take one tablet 3 times a day. I will get worse before it gets better." Glad that I knew how to treatment, I dragged myself back to my hotel room with a prescription in hand. The pain grew worse and worse, just as the doctor had predicted. The doctor must have known what was wrong with me after all, but when the pain had not subsided after 3 days, I called him. "Increase the dose to 5 times a day. It's going to hurt for a while more," he said. After 2 more days of agony, I finally called the international air ambulance. The Swiss doctor diagnosed appendicitis and operated on me immediately. "Why did you wait so long?" he asked me after the surgery. I replied, "It all happened exactly as the doctor said, so I trusted him." I fell victim to the "it will get worse before it gets better" fallacy. That Corsican doctor had no idea. Probably just the same type of stand in you find in all tourist places in high season. Let's take another example. A CEO is at his wit's end, and sales are in the toilet. The salespeople are unmotivated, and the marketing campaign has gone out without a trace. In his desperation, he hires a consultant for $5,000 a day, and this man analyzes the company and comes back with his finding. Your sales department has no vision, and your brand is not positioned clearly. It's a tricky situation. I can fix it for you, but not overnight. The measures will require sensitivity, and most likely sales will fall further before things improve, and the CEO hires the consultant. A year later, sales fall, and the same thing happened the next year. Again and again, the consultant stresses that the company's progress corresponds closely to his prediction. As sales continues their swim in the third year, the CEO fires the consultant. A mere smokescreen. The "it will get worse before it gets better" fallacy is a variant of the so-called confirmation bias. If the problem continues to worsen, the prediction is confirmed. If the situation improves unexpectedly, the customer is happy and the expert can attribute it to his prowess. Either way, he wins. Suppose you are president of a country and have no idea how to run it. What do? You predict difficult years ahead, as your citizens to tighten their belts and then promise to improve the situation only after the delicate stage are the cleansing, purification, and restructuring. Naturally, you leave the duration and severity of the period open. The best evidence of this strategy's success is Christianity. Its literal follower believe that before we can experience heaven on earth, the world must be destroyed. Disasters, floods, fires, death, they are all part of the larger plan and must take place. Believers will view any deterioration of the situation as confirmation of the prophecy and any improvement as a gift from God. In conclusion, if someone says it will get worse before it gets better, you should hear alarm bells ringing. But beware, situations do exist where things first dip and then improve. For example, a career change requires stamina and incorporates loss of pay, and the reorganization of a business also takes time. But in all these cases, we can see relatively quickly if the measures are working. The milestones are clear and verifiable. And look at this, rather than to the heavens. Chapter 13, even the true stories are fairy tales. Story bias. Life is a model as intricate as a Gordian knot, and imagine that an invisible Martian decides to follow you around with an equal invisible notebook, recording what you do, think, and dream. The rundown of your life would consist of entries such as drank coffee, 2 sugars, stepped on the tomback, and swore like a sailor, dreamed that I kissed the neighbor, booked vacation Maldives, no, nearly out of money, and found hair sticking out of the ear, pluck it straight away, and so on. We like to knit this jumble of detail into a neat story. We want our life to form a pattern that can be easily followed. Many call this guiding principle, meaning if our story advances evenly over the years, we refer to it as identity. We try on stories as we try on clothes. Said Max Frisch, a famous Swiss novelist. We do the same with the world history, shaping the detail into a consistent story. Suddenly we understand certain things, for example, why the tragedy of Versailles led to the Second World War, and or why Alan Greenspan's loose monetary policy created the College of Lehman Brothers. We comprehend why the Iron Curtain had to fall or why Harry Potter became a bestseller. Here, we speak about understanding, but these things cannot be understood in the traditional sense. We simply build the meaning into the dome of the word, and stories are dubious entities. They simplify and distort reality and filter things that don't fit, but apparently we cannot do without them. Why remains unclear. What is clear is that people have first used story to explain the world before they began to think scientifically, making mythology older than philosophy, and this has led to the story bias. In the media, the story bias raged like a wildfire. For example, a car is driving over a bridge when the structure suddenly collapses. What do we read the next day? We hear that the tale of the unlucky driver, where he came from and where he was going. We read his biography, born somewhere, grew up somewhere else, earned as a living as something. If he survived and can give interview, we hear exactly how it felt when the bridge came crashing down. The absurd thing, not one of these stories explained the underlying cause of the accident, skip past the driver's account, and consider the bridge construction. Where was the weak point? Was it fatigue? And if not, was the bridge damaged? If so, by what? And was the proper design even used? Where are there other bridges of the same design? The problem with all these questions is that tough, valid, they just don't make for a good yarn. Stories attract us, abstract detail repel us. Consequently, entertaining side issue and backstories are prioritized over relevant fact. On the upside, if it were not for this, we would be stuck with only non-fiction books. And here are the stories from the English novelists. E.M. Forster, which one would you remember better? A. The king died and the queen died. Or B. The king died and the queen died of grief. Most people return the second story more easily, and here the two deaths don't just take place successively. They are emotionally linked. A story A is a factual report, but story B has meaning according to the information theory. We should be able to hold on to a better. It is shorter, but our brains don't work that way. Advertisers have learned to capitalize on this too. Instead of focusing on the item benefit, they create a story around it. Objectively speaking, narratives are irrelevant, but still we find them irresistible. Google illustrated this masterfully in its Super Bowl commercial from 2010, Google Parisian Love. Take a look at it on YouTube. From our own life stories to global events, we shape our everything into meaningful stories. Doing so distort reality and affect the quality of our decision, but there is a remedy. Pick this apart as yourself. What are they trying to hide? Visit the library and spend half a day reading an old newspaper. You will see that event that today look connected were not so at the time. To experience the effect once more, try to view your life story out of context, dig into your old journal and note, and you will see that your life has not followed a straight arrow leading to today, but has been a series of unplanned, unconnected events and experiences, as we will see in the next chapter. Whenever you hear a story, ask yourself, who is the sender, what are his intentions, and what did he hide under the rug? The omitted elements might not be of relevance, but then again, they might be even more relevant than the elements featured in the story, such as when explaining a financial crisis or the cause of war. The real issue with the story, they give us a false sense of understanding, which inevitably leads us to take a bigger risk and urge to take a stroll on this thin ice. Chapter 14. Why you should keep a diary. Hindsight bias. I came across the diaries of my great uncle recently. In 1932, he emigrated from a tiny Swiss village to Paris to seek his fortune in the movies industry. In August 1940, 2 months after Paris was occupied, he noted, "Everyone is certain that the Germans will leave by the end of the year. Their officer also confirmed this to me. England will fall as fast as the French did, and then we will finally have our Parisian lives back, albeit as a part of Germany." The occupation lasted 4 years. In today's history book, the German occupation of France seems to form part of a clear military strategy. In retrospect, the actual course of the war appears the most likely of all scenarios. Why? Because we have fallen victim to the hindsight bias. Let's take a more recent example. In 2007, economic experts painted a rosy picture for the coming years. However, just 12 months later, the financial market imploded, asked about the crisis, and the same expert enumerated its causes. Monetary expansion under Greenspan, lax validation of mortgages, corrupt rating agencies, low capital requirement, and so forth. In hindsight, the reason for the crash is painfully obvious. The hindsight bias is one of the most prevailing fallacies of all. We can aptly describe it as the "I told you so" phenomenon. In retrospect, everything seems clear and inevitable. If a CEO becomes successful due to fortunate circumstances, you will, looking back, rate the probability of his success a lot higher than it actually was. Similarly, following Ronald Reagan's massive election victory over Jimmy Carter in 1980, commentators announced his appointment to be foreseeable even though the election lay on the knife edge until a few days before the final vote. And today, business journalists opine that Google's dominance was predestined, even though each of them would have snorted had such a prediction been made in 1998, one particularly blundering example. Nowadays, it seems tragic and yet completely plausible, and that a single shot in Sarajevo in 1914 would totally upturn the world for 30 years and cost 15 million lives. Every child learned this historical detail in school, but back then nobody would have dreamed of such an escalation. It would have sounded too absurd. So why is the highest hindsight bias so perilous? Well, it makes us believe we are better predictors than we actually are, causing us to be arrogant about our knowledge and consequently to take much risk and not just with a global issue. Have you heard? Sylvia and Chris are not together anymore. It was always going to go wrong. They were just so different, or they were just so similar, or they spent too much time together, or even they barely saw one another. Overcoming the hindsight bias is not easy. Studies have shown that people who are aware of it fall for it just as much as everyone else. So I'm very sorry, but you have just wasted your time reading this chapter. If you are still with me, I have one final tip. This time from personal rather than professional experience. Keep a journal, write down your prediction for political changes, your career, your weights, the stock market, and so on. Then from time to time, compare your notes with actual developments. You will be amazed at what a poor forecaster you are, and don't forget to read history too. Not a retrospective, compact theory compiled in textbook, but the diaries, oral history, and historical document from the period. If you cannot alive without news, read newspaper from 5, 10, or 20 years ago, and this will give you a much better sense of just how unpredictable the world is. Hindsight may provide temporary comfort to those overwhelmed by complexity, but as for providing deeper revelation about how the world works, you will benefit by looking elsewhere. Chapter 15: Why you systematically overestimate your knowledge and abilities. Overconfidence effect. My favorite musician, Johann Sebastian Bach, was anything but a one-hit wonder. He composed numerous works. How many there were, I will reveal at the end of this chapter. But for now, here is a small assignment. How many concertos do you think Bach composed? Choose a range, for example, between 100 and 500, aiming for an estimate that is 98% correct and only 2% off. How much confidence should we have in our own knowledge? Psychology Howard Travia and Mark Albert wondering the same thing. Have interviewed hundreds of people in this way. They have asked participants to estimate the total egg production in the US, or the number of physicians and surgeons listed in the yellow pages of the phone directory for Boston, or the number of foreign automobiles imported to the US. Even the total collection of the Panama Canal in millions of dollars, subjects could choose any range they like, with the aim of not being wrong more than 2% of the time. The results were amazing. In the final tally, instead of just 2%, they were off 40% of the time. The researchers dubbed this amazing phenomenon overconfidence. Overconfidence also applies to forecasts such as stock market performance over a year or for your firm profit over the 3 years. And we systematically overestimate our knowledge and our ability to predict on a massive scale. The overconfidence effect does not deal with whether single estimates are correct or not. Rather, it measures the difference between what people really know and what they think they know. What's surprising is this: experts suffer even more from overconfidence than lay people do. If asked for if asked to forecast oil prices in 5 years' time, an economist professor will be as wide and mark of a zookeeper will. However, the professor will offer his forecast with certitude. Overconfidence does not stop at economic. In survey, 84% of Frenchmen estimate that they are above average lovers. Without the overconfident effect, that figure should be exactly 50%, and after all, the statistical median means 50% should rank higher than 50% should rank lower. Another survey, 93% of the US students estimated themselves to be above average drivers, and 68% of the faculty at the University of Nebraska rated themselves in the top 25% for teaching ability. Entrepreneurs and those wishing to marry also deem themselves to be different. They believe they can beat the odds, and in fact, entrepreneurial activity would be lower if confidence did not exist. For example, every restaurateur hopes to establish the next Michelin-starred restaurant, even though statistics show that most close their doors after just 3 years, and the return on investment in the restaurant business lies chronically below zero. Hardly any major project exists that are completed in less time and at a lower cost than forecasted. Some delays and cost overruns are even legendary, such as the Airbus A400M and Sydney Opera House and Boston Big Dig. The list can be added to at will. Why is that? Here, two effects act in unison. First, you have classic overconfidence. Second, those with a direct interest in the project have an incentive to underestimate the cost. Consultant, contractor, suppliers seek follow-up orders. Builders feel blustered by the optimistic figure, and through their activities, politicians get more votes. And we will examine the strategic misinterpretation later in this book. What makes overconfidence so prevalent and its effects so confounding is that it is not driven by incentive, it is raw and innate, and it's not counterbalanced by the opposite effect. Underconfidence, which does not exist, no surprise to some reader, overconfidence is more pronounced in men. Women tend not to overestimate their knowledge and abilities as much. Even more troubling, optimists are not the only victim of overconfidence. Even self-proclaimed pessimists overrate themselves just less extremely. In conclusion, be aware that you tend to overestimate your knowledge. Be skeptical of prediction, especially if they come from so-called experts, and with all plans, favor the pessimistic scenario. In this way, you have a chance of judging the situation somewhat realistically. Back to the question from beginning, Johann Sebastian Bach composed 1127 works that survive to this day. He may have composed considerably more, but they are lost. Chapter 16. Don't take news and course seriously. Chauver knowledge. After receiving the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1918, Max Planck went on tour across Germany. Wherever he was invited, he delivered the same lecture on new quantum mechanics. Over time, his Chauver grew to know it by heart. It has to be boring giving the same speech each time. And Professor Planck, how about I do it for you in Munich? You can sit in front of a row and wear my cover's cap, and that would give us both a bit of variety. Planck liked the idea. So that evening, the driver held a long lecture on quantum mechanics in front of the distinguished audience, and later a physics professor stood up with the questions. The driver recoiled. Never would I have thought that someone from such an advanced city as Munich would ask such a simple question. My cover will answer it. According to Charlie Munger, one of the world's best investors, and from whom I have borrowed this story, there are two types of knowledge. First, we have a real knowledge. We see it in people who have committed a large amount of time and effort to understanding a topic. The second type is Chauver knowledge. Knowledge from people who have learned to put on a show. Maybe they have a great voice or good hair, but the knowledge they espouse is not their own. They will have eloquent words as if reading it from a script. Unfortunately, it is increasingly difficult to separate true knowledge from Chauver Chow for knowledge, and with the news anchor, however, it is still easy. These are actors, period. Everyone knows it, and yet it is continued to astound me how much respect these perfectly coived script readers enjoy, not to mention how much they earn moderating panel about topic they barely fathom. With journalists, it is more difficult. Some have acquired true knowledge, often they are veteran reporters who have specialized for a year in a clearly defined area. They make a serious effort to understand the complexity of a subject and to communicate it. They tend to write long articles that highlight a variety of cases and exceptions. The majority of journalists, however, fall into the category of chower. They conjure up articles off the tops of their heads, or rather from Google searches, and their texts are one-sided, short, and often as compensation for their patchy knowledge, snarky and self-satisfied in tone. The same superficially is present in business. The larger a company, the more the CEO is expected to possess star quality. Dedication, solemnity, and reliability are undervalued, at least at the top. Too often, shareholders and business journalists seem to believe that showmanship will derive better results, which is obviously not the case. To guard against the Chauver effect, Warren Buffett, Munger's business partner, has coined a wonderful phrase: circle of competence. What lies inside the circle you understand intuitively, what lies outside you may only partially comprehend. One of the Munger's best pieces of advice is, you have to stick within what I call your circle of competence. You have to know what you understand and what you don't understand. It's not terribly important how big the circle is, but it is terribly important that you know where the perimeter is. Munger underscored this, so you have to figure out what your own aptitudes are. If you play games where other people have the aptitude and you don't, you are going to lose. And that's as close to certain as any prediction that you can make. You have to figure out where you have got an edge, and you have got to play within your own circle of competence. In conclusion, be on the lookout for Chauver knowledge. Do not confuse the company's spokespersons, the ringmaster, the newscaster, the scomser, the verbiage vendor, the ecclesia generator with those who possess the true knowledge. How do you recognize the difference? There is a clear indicator. True experts recognize the limit of what they know and what they do not know. If they find themselves outside their circle of competence, they keep quiet or simply say, I don't know. They stay unapologetically, even with a certain pride. From Chalvers, we hear every line except this. Chapter 17, You control less than you think. Illusion of control. Every day, shortly before 9 o'clock, a man with a red hat stands in a square and begins to have his cap around wildly. After 5 minutes, he disappears. One day, a policeman comes up to him and asks, What are you doing? I'm keeping the giraffes away, but there are not any giraffes here. Well, I must be doing a good job then. A friend with a broken leg was stuck in a bed and asked me to pick up a lottery ticket for him. I went to the store, checked a few boxes, wrote his name on it, and paid. As I handed him a copy of the ticket, he balked. Why did you fill it out? I wanted to do that. I'm never going to win anything with your numbers. Do you really think it affects the draw if you pick the numbers? I inquire. He looked at me blankly. In casinos, most people throw the dice as hard as they can if they need a high number, and as gingerly as possible if they are hoping for a low number, which is as nonsensical as football fans thinking they can swing a game by gesticulating in front of the TV. Unfortunately, they share this illusion with many people who also seek to influence the world by sending out the right thoughts, vibration, positive energy, karma. The illusion of control is the tendency to believe that we can influence something over which we have absolutely no sway, and this was discovered in 1965 by the two researchers, Jenkins and Ward. The experiment was simple, consisting of just two switches and a light, and the men were able to adjust when the switches connected to the light and when not. Even when the light flashed on and off at random, subjects were still convinced that they could influence it by flicking the switches. Or consider this example. An American researcher has been investigating acoustic sensitivity to pain. For this, he placed people in a sound booth and increased the volume until the subject signaled him to stop. The two rooms, A and B were identical, save one thing. Room B had a red panic button on the wall, but the button was purely for show. But it gave a participant the feeling that they were in control of the situation, leading them to withstand significantly more noise. If you have read Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Primo Levi, and Viktor Frankl, this finding will not surprise you. The idea that people can influence their destiny even by a fraction encouraged these prisoners to not give up hope. Crossing the street in Los Angeles is a tricky business, but luckily at the press of a button we can stop traffic. Or can we? The button's real purpose is to make us believe that we have an influence on the traffic lights, and thus we are better able to endure the wait for the signal to change with more patience. The same goes for door open and door close button in elevators. Many are not even connected to the electrical panel, and such a trick are also designed into open plan offices. For some people it will always be too hot, for others too cold. Clever technicians create the illusion of control by installing fake temperature dials, and this reduces energy bills and complain. Such ploys are called placebo button, and they are being pushed in all sorts of realm. Central bankers and government officials. Take, for instance, the federal fund rate, which is an extreme short-term rate, an overnight rate to be precise. While this rate does not affect long-term interest rate, the stock market, nevertheless, reacts frenetically to its every change, and nobody understands why overnight interest rates can have such an effect on the market, but everybody thinks they do, and so they do. The same goes for pronouncements made by the chairman of the Federal Reserve, market move, and even though those statements inject little of tangible value into the real economy, they are merely sound wave and still will allow economic heads to continue to play with the illusory dials. It would be a real wake-up call if all involved realize the truth, and that the world economy is a fundamentally uncontrollable system. And do you have everything under control? Probably less than you think, and do not think you command your way through life like a Roman emperor. Rather, you are the man with the red hat. Therefore, focus on the few things of importance that you can really influence. For everything else, que sera sera. Chapter 18. Never pay your lawyer by the hour. Incentive super response tendency. To control a rat infestation, French colonial rulers in Hanoi in the 19th century passed a law. For every dead rat handed in to the authorities, the catcher would receive a reward, and yes, many rats were destroyed, but many were also bred specially for this purpose. In 1947, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, archaeologists set a finder's fee for each new parchment. Instead of lots of extra scroll being found, they were simply torn apart to increase the reward, and similarly in China in the 19th century, an incentive was offered for finding dinosaur bones, and farmers located a few on their land, broke them into pieces and cast in. Modern incentives are no better. Company boards promise bonuses for achieving targets, and what happens? Managers invest more energy in trying to lower the targets than in growing the business. These are examples of the incentive super response tendency. Credited to Charlie Munger, this Titanic name described a rather trivial observation. People respond to incentive by doing what is in their best interest, and what is noteworthy is, first, how quickly and radically people's behavior changes when incentives come into play or are altered, and second, the fact that people respond to their incentive themselves and not the granted intention behind them. Good incentive system comprise both intent and reward. An example, in ancient Rome, engineers were made to stand underneath the construction at their bridges opening ceremonies. For incentive system, on the other hand, overlook and sometimes even pervert the underlying aim. For example, censoring a book makes its contents more famous, and rewarding bank employees for each loan sold leads to a miserable credit portfolio. Making CEOs pay public didn't dampen the astronomical salaries, and to the contrary, it pushed them upward. Nobody wants to be the loser CEO in his industry. Do you want to influence the behavior of people? Or organizations. You could always preach about values and vision, or you could appeal to reason, but in nearly every case, incentive work better. And this need not be monetary. Anything is usable, for good grades, the Nobel Prizes, the special treatment in the afterlife. For a long time, I tried to understand what made the well-educated nobles from the Middle Ages bid adieu to their comfortable life, swing themselves up onto horse, and take part in crusades, and they were all well aware that the arduous ride to Jerusalem lasted at least 6 months and passed directly through enemy territory. And yet they took the risk. And then it came to me. The answer lies in the incentive system. If they came back alive, they could keep the spoils of war and live out their days as a rich man. If they die, they automatically pass on to the afterlife as a martyr with all the that came with it. It was a win-win. Imagine for a moment that instead of demanding enemies' richest warrior and soldier, charged by the hour, we would effectively be incentive them to take as long as possible, right? So why do we just do just this with the lawyers, architect, consultant, accountant, and driving instructor? My advice: forget hourly rates and always negotiate a fixed price in advance. Be wary too of investment advisor endorsing particular financial product, and they are not interested in your financial well-being but in earning a commission on this project. The same goes for entrepreneurs and investment bankers' business plan. These are often worthless because again the vendor have their own interests at heart. What is the old age? Never ask a barber if you need a haircut. In conclusion, keep an eye out of different intensive super response tendency. If a person or an organization behavior confounds you, ask yourself what incentive might lie behind it. I guarantee you that you will be able to explain 90% of the cases this way. What makes up the remaining 10%? Passion, idiocy, facetious, or malice. Chapter 19: The dubious efficacy of doctors, consultants, and psychotherapists. Regression to mean. His back pain was sometimes better, sometimes worse, and there were days when he felt like he could move mountain, and those when he could barely move. When that was the case, fortunately it happened only rarely. His wife would drive him to the chiropractor, and the next day he would feel much more mobile and would recommend the therapist to everyone. Another man, younger and with a respectable golf handicap of 12, gushed in a similar fashion about his golf instructor. Whenever he played miserably, he booked an hour with the pro, and lo and behold, in the next game he fared much better. A third man, an investment advisor at a major bank, invented a sort of rain dance which he performed in the restroom every time he stuck and had performed extremely badly, as absurd as it seemed. He felt compelled to do it, and things always improve afterward. What links the three men is a fallacy, the regression to mean delusion. Suppose your region is experiencing a record period of cold weather. In all probability, the temperature will rise in a few next days back toward the monthly average. The same goes for extreme heat, drought, or rain. Weather fluctuates around a mean. The same is true for chronic pain, golf handicaps, stock market performance, luck in love, subjective happiness, and test scores. In short, the crippling back pain would most likely have improved without the chiropractor. The handicap would have returned to 12 without additional lessons, and the performance of the investment advisor would also have shifted back toward the market average, with or without the restroom dance. Extreme performances are interspersed with the less extreme one. The most successful stock pick from the past 3 years are hardly going to be the most successful stock in the coming 3 years. And knowing this, you can appreciate why some athlete would rather not make it on the front of pages of the newspaper. Subconsciously, they know that the next time they race, they probably won't achieve the same top result, which has nothing to do with the media attention, but is to do with the natural variation in performance. Or take the example of a division manager who wants to improve employee morale by sending the least motivated 3% of the workforce on a course. The result? The next time he looks at motivation level, the same people will not make up the bottom few, and there will be the others. Was the course worth it? Hard to say, since the group motivation level would probably have returned to their personal norms, even without the training. The situation is similar with patients who are hospitalized for depression. They usually leave the clinic feeling a little better. It is quite possible, however, that the stay contributed absolutely nothing. Another example in Boston, the lowest performing schools were entered into a complex support program. The following year, the school had moved up in the rankings. An improvement that the authorities attributed to the program rather than to natural regression to mean. Ignoring regressions to mean that can have destructive consequences, such as teachers or managers concluding that the stick is better than carrot. For example, following a test, the highest performing students are praised and the lowest are castigated. In the next exam, other students will probably purely coincidentally achieve the highest and lowest scores, and thus the teacher conclude that the approach helps and praise hinders a fallacy that keeps on giving. In conclusion, when you hear stories such as I was sick, went to the doctor and got better a few days later, or the company had a bad year so we got a consultant in and now the results are back to normal, look out for our old friend, the regression, the mean error. Chapter 20. Never judge a decision by its outcome. Outcome bias. A quick hypothesis. Say 1 million monkeys speculate on the stock market. They buy and sell stock like a crazy and of course completely at random. What happens after 1 week? About half of the monkey will have made a profit and the other half a loss. The ones that made a profit can stay, the ones that made a loss you send home. In the second week, one half of the monkey will still be riding high, while the other half will have made a loss and are sent home, and so on and so on. After 10 weeks, about 1,000 monkeys will be left, and those who have always invested their money well. After 20 weeks, just one monkey will remain, and this one always, without fail, choose the right stock and is now a billionaire. And let's call him the success monkey. How does the media react? They will punch on this animal to understand its success principle, and they will find some. Perhaps the monkey eats more bananas than the others. Perhaps he sits in another corner of the cage, or maybe he swings headlong through the branches, or he takes long, reflective pauses while grooming. He must have some recipe for success, right? How else could he perform so brilliantly, spot on for 20 weeks, and that from a simple monkey? Impossible. The monkey story illustrates the outcome bias. We tend to evaluate decisions based on the result rather than on the decision process, and this fallacy is also known as the historian error. A classic example is the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Should he militarily best have been evacuated or not? From today's perspective, obviously, for 3 was plenty of evidence that an attack was imminent. However, only in retrospect do the signals appear so clear. At the time, in 1941, there was a plethora of contradictory signals. Some pointed to an attack, others did not. To assess the quality of the decision, we must use the information available at the time, filtering out everything we know about it post-attack, particularly that it did indeed take place. Another experiment. You must evaluate the performance of 3 heart surgeons. To do this, you ask each to carry out the difficult operation 5 times. Over the years, the probability of dying from this procedure has stabilized at 20%. With surgeon A, no one dies. With surgeon B, no patient dies. With surgeon C, 2 die. How do you rate the performance A, B, and C? If you think like most people, you rate A the best, B the second best, and C the worst, and thus you have just fallen into the outcome bias. You can guess why. The samples are too small, rendering the results meaningless. You can only really judge a surgeon if you know something about the field, and then carefully monitor the preparation and execution of the operation. In other words, you assess the process and not the result. Alternatively, you could employ a larger sample. If you have a patient who needs this particular operation, 100 or 1000 operation. For now, it is enough to know that with an average surgeon, there is a 33% chance that no one will die, and 41% chance that no one person will die, and 20% chance that 2 people will die. That's a simple probability calculation, what stands out, there was no huge difference between 0 death and 2 death. To assess the three surgeons purely on the basis of the outcome would be not only negligent but also unethical. In conclusion, never judge a decision purely by its result, especially when randomness or external factors play a role. A bad result does not automatically indicate a bad decision and vice versa. So rather than tearing your hair out about a wrong decision or applauding yourself for one that may have only coincidentally led to success, remember why you choose what you did, where you reason, rational and understandable, then you would do well to stick with that method even if you didn't strike lucky last time. Chapter 21. Less is More. The Paradox of Choice. My sister and her husband bought an unfinished house a little while ago, and since then we haven't been able to talk about anything else. The sole topic of conversation for the past 2 months has been bedroom tiles, ceramic, granite, marble, metal, stone, wood, glass, and every type of laminate known to man. And rarely have I seen my sister in such anguish. There are just too many to choose from, she explained, throwing her hands in the air and returning to the tile catalog, her constant companion. I have counted and researched. My local grocery store stocks 48 varieties of yogurt, 134 types of red wine, 64 different cleaning products, and a grand total of 30,000 items. Amazon, the internet bookseller, has 2 million titles available, and notice people are bombarded with options, such as hundreds of mental disorders, thousands of different careers, even more holiday destinations, and infinite variety of lifestyle, and there has never been more choice. When I was young, we had 3 types of yogurt, 3 television channels, 2 crunches, 2 kinds of cheese, and 1 type of fish, and 1 telephone provided by the Swiss Post, and the black box with a dial served no other purpose than making calls, and that did us just fine. In contrast, anyone who enters a phone store today runs the risk of being flattened by an avalanche of brands, model, and contract options. And yet selection is the yardstick of progress. It is what sets us apart from plant in economies and Stone Age, and yes, abundance make you giddy, but there is a limit. When it is exceeded, a surfeit of choice has destroyed quality of life. The technical term of this is the paradox of choice. In this book of the same title, psychologist Barry Squart described why this is so. First, a large selection leads to inner paralysis. To test this, the supermarket set up a stand where a customer could sample 24 varieties of jelly. They could try as many as they like and then buy them at a discount. The next day, the owner carried out the same experiment with only 6 flavors, and the result is sold 10 times more jelly on 2 days. Why? With such a wide range, customers could not come to a decision, so they bought nothing. The experiment was repeated several times with different products, and the results were always the same. Second, a broader selection leads to poorer decision. If you ask young people what is important in a life partner, they reel off all the usual qualities: intelligent, good manners, warmth, the ability to listen, a sense of humor, and physical attractiveness. But do they actually take these criteria into account when choosing someone? In the past, a young man from a village of average size could choose among maybe 20 girls of similar age with whom he went to school. He knew their families and vice versa, leading to a decision based on several well-known attributes. And nowadays, in the era of online dating, millions of potential partners are at our disposal. It has been proven that the stress caused by this mind-boggling variety is so large that the male brain reduces the decision to one single criterion: physical attractiveness. The consequences of this selection process you already know, perhaps even from personal experience. And finally, large selection leads to discontent. How can you be sure you are making the right choice when 200 options surround and confound you? The answer is you can't, you cannot. The more choice you have, the more unsure, and therefore dissatisfied you are afterward. So what can you do? Think carefully about what you want before you inspect existing offers. Write down these criteria and stick to them rigidly, and also realize that you can never make a perfect decision. Aiming for this, given the flood of possibilities, is a form of irrational perfectionism. Instead, learn to love a good choice, and yes, even in the terms of life partner. Only the best will do in this age of unlimited variety, where the opposite is true. Good enough is the new optimum, except, of course, for you and me. Chapter 22, You Like Me. You really, really like me. Liking bias. Kevin has just spoke 2 boxes of fine markouts. He rarely drinks wine, not even a Bordeaux. But the sales assistant was so nice, not fake or pushy, just really likable, so he bought them. Joe Girard is considered the most successful car salesman in the world. His tip for success: there is nothing more effective in selling anything than getting the customer to really believe that you like him and care about him. Girard does not just talk the talk. His secret weapon is sending a card to his customer each month, just one sentence, salute them, I like you. The liking bias is startlingly simple to understand, and yet we continually fall prey to it. It means this: the more we like someone, the more inclined we are to buy from or help that person. And still the question remains, what does likable even mean? According to research, we see people as pleasant if A. They are outwardly attractive, B. They are similar to us in terms of origin, personality, or interest, or C. They like us. Consequently, advertising is full of attractive people. Ugly people seem unfriendly and don't even make it into the background. CA. In addition to engaging super attractive types advertising, it also employ people like you and me. CB. And those are similar in appearance, accent, or background. In short, the more similar the better. Mirroring is a standard technique in sales to get exactly this effect. And here, the salesperson tries to copy the gesture, language, and facial expression of his prospective client. If the buyer speaks very slowly, quietly, often scratching his head, it makes sense for the seller to speak slowly and quietly, and to scratch his head now and then too. And that makes him likable in the eyes of the buyer. And thus, the business deal, it's more likely. Finally, it's not unheard of for advertisers to pay us compliment. How many times have you bought something because you're worth it? Here, factor C comes into play. We find people appealing if they like us. Compliment work wonders, even if they ring hollow as a drum. So-called multi-level marketing, or selling through personal networks, work solely because of the liking bias. And though there are excellent plastic containers in the supermarket for a quarter of the price, Tupperware generates an annual turnover of $2 billion. Why? The friends who told the Tupperware parties meet the second and third congeniality standard perfectly. 8 agencies employ the liking bias to great effect. Their campaign used beaming children or women also almost exclusively. Never will you see a stone-faced, wounded guerrilla fighter staring at you from billboards, even though he also needs your support. Conservation organization also carefully select who gets the starring role in their advertisement. Have you ever seen a wildlife fun brochure filled with spider, worms, algae, or bacteria? They are perhaps just as endangered as pandas, gorillas, koala, and seals, and even more important for the ecosystem. But we feel nothing for them. The more human a creature act, the more similar it is to us, the more we like it. The bonds keeper fly is extinct. Too bad. Politicians, too, are masters of the liking bias. Depending on the makeup and the interest of the audience, they emphasize different topics such as residential area, social background, or economic issue, and they flatter us. Each potential voter is made to feel like an indispensable member of the team. Your vote counts. Of course, your vote counts, but only by the teeniest of fraction, bordering on the irrelevant. A friend who deals in oil palms told me how he once closed an 8-figure deal for a pipeline in Russia. Bribery? I inquire. He shook his head. We were chatting, and suddenly we got on the topic of sailing. It turned out that both of us, the buyer and me, were die-hard 470 dinghy fans, and from that moment he liked me. I was all friend. So the deal was sealed. Amiability works better than a bribery. So, if you are a salesperson, make buyers think you like them, even if this means outright flattery. And if you are a consumer, always judge a product independently of who is selling it. Banish the salespeople from your mind, or rather pretend you don't like them. Chapter 23. Don't cling to things. And Aumen Effect. The BMX gleamed in the parking lot of the used car dealership. Although it had a few miles on the odometer, It looked in a perfect condition. I know a little about used car and told me it was worth around $40,000. However, the salesman was pushing for $50,000 and wouldn't budge a time. And when he called the next week to say he would accept $40,000, after all, I went for it. And the next day, I took it up for a spin and stopped at a gas station. The owner came out to admire the car and proceeded to offer me $53,000 in a cash on the spot, but I politely declined, only on the way home. Did I realize how ridiculous I was to have said no? Something that I considered worth $40,000 had passed into my possession and suddenly taken on a value of more than $53,000. If I were thinking purely rationally, I would have sold the car immediately, but alas, I would have fallen under the influence of the endowment effect. We consider things to be more valuable than the moment we own them. In other words, if we are selling something, we charge more for it than what we ourselves will be willing to spend. The Buddhist physiologist Dan Ariely conducted the following experiment. In one of his classes, he raffled a ticket to the major basketball game, then polled the student to see how much they thought the ticket were worth, and the empty-handed student estimated around $170, whereas the winning student would not sell their ticket below an average $2,400. The simple fact of the ownership makes us add zeros to the selling price. In real estate, the endowment effect is palpable. Sellers become emotionally attached to their houses and thus systematically overestimate their value. They bulk at the market price, expecting buyers to pay more, which is completely absurd since this excess is a little more than sentimental value. Richard Taylor performed an interesting classroom experiment at Cornell University to measure the endowment effect. He distributed coffee mug to half of the students and told them they could either take the mug home or sell it at a price they could specify. The other half of the students who didn't get a mug were asked how much they would be willing to pay for a mug. In other words, Taylor set up a market for coffee mugs. One would expect overly 50% of these students would be willing to trade to either sell or buy a mug. But the result was much lower than that. Why? Because the average owner would not sell below $5.25 and the average buyer would not pay more than $2.25 for a mug. We can safely say that we are better at collecting things than at casting them off. Not only does this explain why we fill our homes with the junk, but also why lovers of stamps, watches, and pieces of art part with them so seldomly. Amazingly, the endowment effect affects not only possession but also near ownership. Auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's thrive on this. A person who bids until the end of an auction gets the feeling that the object is practically theirs, and thus increasing its value. The would-be owner is suddenly willing to pay much more than planned, and any withdrawal from the bidding is perceived as a loss, which defies all logic. In a large auction, such as the for mining right or mobile radio frequency, we often observe the winner's course, and here the successful bidder turns out to be the economic loser when he gets catch up in the favor and overbids. I will offer more insight on the winner's curse in chapter 35. There is a similar effect in the job market. If you are applying for a job and don't get a call back, you have every reason to be disappointed. However, if you make it to the final stages of the selection process and then receive the rejection, the disappointment can be much bigger. Irrationally, either you get a job or you don't, nothing else should matter. In conclusion, don't cling to things. Consider your property something that the universe, whatever you believe this to be, has bestowed on you temporarily, and keep in mind that it can recoup this or more in the blink of an eye. Chapter 24: The Inevitability of Unlikely Event, Coincidence. At 7:15 p.m. on March 1950, the 15 members of the church choir in Beatrice, Nebraska were scheduled to meet for rehearsal. For various reasons, they were all running behind, and the minister's family was delayed because his wife still had to iron their daughter's dress, and one couple was held back when their car wouldn't start. The pianist wanted to be there 30 minutes early, but he fell into a deep sleep after dinner, and so on. At 7:20 8:25 p.m., the church exploded. The blast was heard all around the village. It blew out the walls and sent the roof crashing to the ground. Miraculously, nobody was killed. The fire chief traced the explosion back to a gas leak, even though members of the choir were convinced they had received a sign from God. A hand of God or coincidence? Something last week made me think of my old school friend Andy, whom I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Suddenly the phone rang. I picked it up and lo and behold, it was Andy. I must be telepathic, explaining excitedly, but telepathy or coincidence. On 5 October 1990, the San Francisco Examiner reported the Intel would take its rival AMD to court. Intel found out that the company was planning to launch a computer chip named EM386, a term which clearly referred to Intel 386 chip. How Intel came upon the information is remarkable. By pure coincidence, both companies had hired someone named Mike Webb. Both men were staying in the same hotel in California and checked out on the same day. After they had left, the hotel accepted a package from Mike Webb at reception. It contained confidential document about the EM386 chip, and the hotel mistakenly sent it to Mike Webb of Intel, who promptly forwarded the content for the legal department. How likely are stories like that? The Swiss psychiatrist Carl G. Jung saw in them the work of an unknown force, which he called synchronicity. But how should a rationally minded thinker approach this account, preferably with a piece of paper and a pencil? Consider the first case, the explosion of the church. Draw your boxes to represent each of the potential events, and the first possibility is what actually took place. Choir, delay, and church exploded. But there are three other options. Choir delay and the church did not explode. Choir on time and church explode, and choir on time and the church did not explode. Estimate the frequency of this event and write them in the corresponding box. Pay special attention to how often the last case has happened. Every day, millions of children gather for scheduled rehearsal, and their churches don't blow up. And suddenly the story has lost its unimaginable quality. For all these millions of churches, it would be improbable if something like what happened in Beatrice, Nebraska didn't take place at least once a century. So, no hand of God. And anyway, why would God want to blow a church to smithereens? What a ridiculous way to communicate with your worshippers. Let's apply the same thinking to the phone call. Keep in mind the many occasions when Andy thinks of you but does not call, when you think of him and he does not call, when you don't think of him and he calls, when he does not think of you and you call. There is an almost infinite number of occasions when you don't think of him and he does not call, but since people spend about 90% of their time thinking about others, it is not unlikely that eventually two people will think of each other and one of them will pick up the phone. And it must not be just Andy. If you have 100 of other friends, the probability of this happening increases greatly. We tend to stumble when estimating probabilities. If someone says never, I usually register this as minuscule probability greater than 0, and since never cannot be compensated by a negative probability, and some, let's not get too excited, improbable coincidences are precisely that, rare but very possible events, it's not surprising when they finally happen, and what would be more surprising would be if they never came to be. Chapter 25, The Calamity of Conformity. Groupthink. Have you ever bitten your tongue in a meeting? Surely you sit there, say nothing and nod along to proposals. And after all, you don't want to be the eternal naysayers. Moreover, you might not be 100% sure why you disagree, whereas the other are anonymous and far from stupid. So you keep your mouth shut for another day when everyone thinks and acts like this. Groupthink is at work. This is where a group of smart people makes reckless decisions because everyone aligns their opinion with the supposed consensus, and thus motions are passed that each individual group member would have rejected if no peer pressure had been involved. Groupthink is a special branch of social proof, a flaw that we discussed in a chapter. In March 1960, the U.S. Secret Service began to mobilize anti-communist exiles from Cuba, and most of them living in Miami, to use against Fidel Castro regime. In January 1961, 2 days after taking office, President Kennedy was informed about the secret plan to invade Cuba. 3 months later, a key meeting took place at the White House in which Kennedy and his advisors all voted in favor of the invasion. On 17 April 1961, a barricade of 1,400 exiled Cubans landed at the Bay of Pigs and Cuba's south coast. With the help of the U.S. Navy, the Air Force, and the CIA, the aim was to overboard Castro's government. However, nothing went as planned. On the first day, not a single supply ship reached the coast, and the Cuban Air Force sank the first two, and the next two turned around and fled back to the U.S. a day later. Castro's army completely surrounded the bridge. On the third day, 1,200 survivors were taken into custody and sent to military prisons, and Kennedy's invasion of the Bay of Pigs is regarded as one of the biggest flops in American foreign policy. That such an absurd plan was ever agreed upon. Never mind to put into action is astounding. All of the assumptions that spoke in favor of invasion were erroneous. For example, Kennedy's team completely underestimated the strength of Cuba's air force, and also it was expected that in an emergency the brigade would be able to hide the Escambray mountain and carry out an underground war against Castro from there. A glance at the map shows that the refuge was 100 miles away from the Bay of Pigs with an insurmountable swamp in between, and yet Kennedy and his advisor were among the most intelligent people to ever run an American government. What went wrong between January and April of 1961? Psychology professor Irving Janis has studied many fiascos. He concluded that they share the following pattern. Members of close-knit group cultivate team spirit by unconsciously building illusion. One of these fantasies is belief in an invisibility about our leader. In this case, Kennedy and the group are confident that the plan will work, then luck will be on our side. And next comes the illusion of anonymity. If the others are of the same opinion, any dissenting view must be wrong, and no one wants to be the naysayers who destroy the unity. And finally, each person is happy to be part of the group. Expressing a reservation could mean exclusion from it. In our evolutionary past, such a banishment guaranteed death, and hence our strong urge to remain in the group's favor. The business world is no stranger to group thing. A classic example is the fate of the world-class airline Swiss Air. Here, a group of highly paid consultants rallied around the former CEO and bolstered by the euphoria the past successes developed a high-risk expansion strategy. The zealous team built up such a strong consensus that even rational reservations were suppressed, leading to the airline's collapse in 2001. If you ever find yourself in a tight anonymous group, you must speak your mind, even if your team does not like it, and questions tacit assumption, even if you risk explosion from the warm nest. And if you lead a group, appoint someone as a devil's advocate, and she will not be the most popular member of the team, but she might be the most important. Chapter 26. Why you will soon be playing Mega Trillions, Neglect of Probability. Two games of change. In the first, you can win $10 million, and in the second, $10,000. Which do you play? If you win the first game, it changes your life completely. You can quit your job, tell your boss where to go, and live off the winnings. If you hit the jackpot in the second game, you can take a nice vacation in Caribbean. But you will be back at your desk quick enough to see your postcard arrive, and the probability of winning is 1 of the 100 million in the first game and 1 in the 10,000 in the second game. So which do you choose? Our emotion draw us to the first game, even though the second is 10 times better objectively considered expected win times probability. Therefore, the trend is toward ever larger jackpot, mega billions, mega billions, mega millions, mega trillions, no matter how small the odds are. In a classical experiment from 1972, participants were divided into two groups. The members of the first group were told that they would receive a small electric shock. In the second group, subjects were told that the risk of this happening was only 50%. The researcher measured physical anxiety, like heart rate, nervousness, sweating, and etc. Shortly before commencing, the results were well shocking. There was absolutely no difference. Participants in both groups were equally stressed, and the next, the researcher announced a series of reduction in the probability of a shock for the second group. from 50% to 20%, then 10%, then 5%. The result, still no difference. However, when they declared they would increase the strength of the expected current, both group anxiety level rose. Again, by the same degree, this illustrates that we respond to the expected magnitude of an event, but not to its likelihood. In other words, we lack an intuitive grasp of probability. The proper term for this is neglect of probability, and it leads to error in decision making. We invest in startup because the potential profit makes dollar sign flash before our eyes, but we forget, are too lazy to investigate the slim chance of new businesses actually achieving such a growth. And similarly, following extensive media coverage of a plane crash, we cancel flight without really considering the minuscule probability of crashing, which of course remains the same before and after such a disaster. Many amateur investors compare the investment solely on the basis of yield. For them, Google shares with a return of 20% must be twice as good as property at that returns 10%. And that's wrong. It would be a lot smarter to also consider both investment risks. But then again, we have no natural feel for this, so we often turn a blind eye to it. Back to the experiment with the electric shock. In the group B, the probability of getting the child was further reduced from 5% to 3%, and only when the probability reached zero did Group B respond differently to a Group A, and to us, 10% risk seems infinitely better than a highly improbable 1% risk. To test this, let's examine two methods of treating drinking water. Suppose a river has two equally larger tributaries. One is treated using method A, which reduces the risk of dying from contaminated water from 5% to 2%. The other is treated using method B, which reduces the risk from 1% to 0%. The threat is completely eliminated. So, method A or B? If you think like most people, you will opt for method B, which is silly because with the measure A, 3% fewer people die, and with B, just 1% fewer. Method A is 3 times as good. This fallacy is called the zero risk bias. A classical example of this is the U.S. Food Act of 1958, which prohibits food that contain cancer-causing substances. Instead of achieving zero risk of cancer, this ban sounds good at first, but it ends up leading to the use of more dangerous but non-carcinogenic food additives. It is also absurd, as the Paracelsus illustrated in the 16th century. Poisoning is always a question of dosage. Furthermore, this law can never be enforced properly since it is impossible to remove the last banned molecule from food. Each farm would have to function like a hyper-sterile computer chip factory, and the cost of food would increase 100-fold. Economically, zero risk rarely makes sense. One exception is when the consequences are colossal, such as a deadly, highly contagious virus escaping from a biotech laboratory. We have no intuitive grasp of risk and thus distinguish poorly between different threats. The more serious the threat and the more emotional the topic, such as radioactivity, the less reassuring a reduction in risk seems to us. The researchers at the University of Chicago have shown that people are equally afraid of a 99% change as they are a 1% change of contamination by toxic chemicals, an irrational response, but a